The rainy night had descended and passed. The next morning, the small village of Danpur in Uttar Pradesh's Bahraich district woke up drenched. A light haze hung over the muddy lanes, drops dripping from neem mango leaves splashed on the ground. Between mud-plastered houses, a cow was tied here and there. And from somewhere, smoke rose from a chulha. From the outside, everything looked normal. But behind the walls of one house in this village, a storm sat suppressed. In that house lived Sushila, slim and frail. Deep fatigue in her eyes, a faint bindi on her forehead. Early in the morning, she was quietly chopping onions and green chilies. Water was boiling in a dekchi on the chula. Her hands moved fast, but the burden on her mind was clearly visible. Years after marriage, she had stopped complaining. Now her life was nothing but endurance. In the room opposite, her husband, Raghav, sat on a bamboo stool. Tall, dark complexioned, a daily wage laborer. In the village, people called him jovial. But inside the house, his real face appeared, coming back drunk, hurling abuses, raising his hand. This was part of every day. Both children, Deepa and her younger brother Bitu, sat on a mat on the floor, watching their mother in silence. Holding her book, Deepa gripped her brother's hand tightly. Her eyes seemed to say, "Don't be afraid. I am here." Bitu tried to draw some pictures in his notebook. But every time there was a sound, his hand trembled. "Where is the tea?" Raghav's heavy voice echoed in the room. "It's just coming up," Sushila said softly. Raghav lit a bidi, and smoke filled the entire room. The children were frightened. While serving the food, Sushila said, "Have the roti first. It's hot." Raghav snapped. "You will tell me what I should do first. Whether I should serve tea first or eat roti. That is my job." The cane chair scraped loudly. The silence grew even deeper. This was their everyday morning, seemingly ordinary, but filled inside with fear and tension. Sometimes the village women would ask, "Bahu, are you well? Your face looks very dull." Sushila would just smile. No one realized that this fatigue was not only from labor, but from wounds of years. That evening, Raghav again returned drunk, clothes smeared with mud, eyes red, and anger at its peak. He flung the door open. "Where is the food?" His voice struck the trembling walls. Sushila rushed. Dal was on the boil in the dekchi. Rotis were puffing on the tawa. But Raghav's anger had broken all limits. He flung the plate. "These dry rotis. Am I a beggar?" And then, a resounding slap. Sushila's face burned, but she did not make a sound. Returning to the kitchen, her eyes fell on the knife. At that very moment, an inner voice said, "How long? How many more days?" Her hand trembled. Her breath quickened. She felt the anger that had been suppressed for years. Across the room, Raghav was muttering. Deepa and Bitu were watching through the crack of the door. There was fear in the eyes of both children and in Deepa's eyes, a question as well. Is something going to change now? In the steam rising from the kitchen, Sushila felt as if a face was emerging, eyes that had frightened her for years. In that moment, she understood now this silence would break. In India's small villages, domestic violence often remains hidden. Women endure because society questions and taunts, but sometimes this very silence turns into blood. This was the night when history was about to change. In Danpur village, like the water boiling in the Degchi, something was boiling inside Sushila. And soon, this silence was going to shake the entire village. The air on that night in Danpur felt somewhat heavy. The rain had stopped, but the smell of wet earth was still drifting through the whole village. Inside the house, the flame of an earthen diya was trembling, and along with it, Sushila's mind was trembling too. Raghav was half reclined on a charpoy, drawing on a bidai. The smell of liquor had filled the room. His eyes were red, and his voice irritable. In this house, nothing is ever done properly. Where do you blow away all the money, he muttered. In the corner of the room, Deepa covered her brother Bitu with a sheet. Her heart was thudding. She knew that like every night there would be noise and commotion today as well. But the air was different tonight, as if some invisible danger were hanging. In the kitchen, Sushila's gaze was fixed on that knife. The steam from the boiling water was falling on her face. Her hand was shaking, but in her eyes, years of pain and humiliation had collected. Suddenly, a voice rang in her ears. How long will you stay silent? Now or never? In her mind, scenes of years flashed, Raghav's slap, abuses hurled in front of the children, the taunt of an empty pocket, and her tears that no one ever wiped. Her breathing grew fast. Slowly, she stepped out of the kitchen. The wooden floor creaked. Raghav opened one eye halfway and looked. Now what is it he said? Bored. A moment of silence. And then, a swift movement. The knife went straight into his chest. A yolt. A cry. The BD fell from his hand. A line of blood spread on the mud wall like splashes. Raghav's eyes stayed wide open, filled with disbelief and pain. Deepa saw all this through the crack of the door. Her breath stopped. She immediately shut her eyes tight and pressed Bitu's head into her lap. Her body was shaking with fear and shock. Raghav kept convulsing. His hands jerked in the air, but there was no fear left on Sushila's face. In her eyes, there was only a cold calm. With every strike, she was drawing out the poison within herself. In a short while, Raghav's body went limp. His eyes remained open, but there was no light in them now. Silence returned to the house, but it was not the same silence. It was the silence of a dark tunnel. Sushila stood there for a while. Faint words came from her lips. Now it's over. But the very next moment, her eyes fell on the degchi. The water in it was still boiling. Steam was drifting in the air. In that instant, a thought flashed in her mind. Strange, dangerous, and unnatural. What if no one ever comes to know? What if everything ends here itself? She slowly began to drag Raghav's body. The mud floor turned red. Drops of blood kept trailing behind. The children heard the sound, but remained silent. Tears flowed from Deepa's eyes, but she did not scream. Reaching the kitchen, she lifted the lid of the degchi. The water was surging. She added haldi, dhania and tejpatta. Then she picked up the knife. With every cut, a strange coolness was descending on her face. Slowly, a smell began to rise from the kitchen, the aroma of garlic, ginga, spices, and along with it, something else. A smell that no one could understand. That night, no scream rang through Danpur's lanes, but the aroma rising from that very house would, in the days to come, raise questions for the entire village. Crime does not always happen suddenly. It cooks in years of silence. When violence and humiliation cross all limits, a person's patience breaks. And when it breaks, the outcome is so dreadful that society shudders, even on hearing it. On this night in Danpur, a woman killed her husband, but the truly frightening thing was the way she chose to hide his secret, something that, in the coming days, was going to shake the very soul of the village. The next morning in Danpur village looked ordinary. A light mist hung in the sky. Roosters were crowing, and women were drawing water from the hand pump. But inside Sushila's house, everything had changed. In the kitchen, the degchi was boiling. The aroma of haldi, dhania, adrak and lasoon spread through the courtyard. To someone seeing from outside, it would seem, what a wonderful dish is being cooked. But mixed into that fragrance was something else, something not normal. Something only Sushila knew. Deepa and Bitu were sitting in the courtyard. In their eyes, there was not sleep, but the weight of fear. Deepa said softly, Bitu, what you saw last night. Don't tell anyone. What Amma did was compulsion. Bitu looked at his sister with innocent eyes. His lips were trembling, but he nodded. After a while, Sushila came out of the kitchen. In her hands were bowls steaming with vapor. She smiled by force. Come, have breakfast. Today I have made a special soup. With trembling hands, Deepa picked up the bowl. When the spoon struck it, a ting-ting sound rang in the room. As if someone had sliced through the silence, she looked into the bowl. In the thick broth, a few pieces were floating tinged with redness, of strange shapes. Her throat went dry. Amma, where did this meat come from? Yesterday we didn't even have money. Her voice was low, but it was shaking. Sushila's smile disappeared. A cold hardness came into her eyes. You don't need to know so much. I have made arrangements. Eat and keep quiet. With trembling hands, Deepa took a mouthful. The taste of spices touched her tongue sharp. Hot. But from within a strange sourness, she felt as if every morsel was getting stuck in her throat. Tears flowed from her eyes, but she swallowed in silence. Bittu, who was innocent, was eating with great relish. Amma, it is very tasty. Give me more. Sushila refilled his bowl. In her eyes, there was a mixed expression of satisfaction and fear. At that time, a neighbor passed outside Rampiari. She stopped near the house and sniffed the air. Arewa, what a delicious fragrance. Sushila Bau, you are making such good dishes every day. But your man Rahav has not been seen for many days. Where has he gone? Standing at the door, Sushila gave a false smile. He has gone to the city for work. He will return soon. Rampiari nodded in agreement. But while leaving, she muttered softly, such a deep aroma. It doesn't come from ordinary meat. Her suspicion now mixed into the village air. By nightfall, Sushila was sitting alone in the kitchen. The children had gone to sleep. The degji was still half full. She removed the lid. Steam rose. She looked inside, and suddenly, her blood froze. Amid the broth, a shape was floating up as if a half-burned palm. Its fingers were spread, as if trying to come out. Sushila wanted to scream, but no sound came from her throat. And just then, the same voice sounded again, heavy, whispering, air-raising. You think you finished me? I am in your every mouthful, in your children's every breath. Sushila hurriedly puts the lid back. Her face is wet with sweat, her breathing ragged, but the voice is still echoing in her ears. Now you will never be rid of me. In Danpur's lanes, people had, till now, only felt the fragrance. But within the four walls of that house, a terrifying secret was slowly cooking. The children's silence, the neighbor's suspicion, and the emptiness in the mother's eyes. These were signs of the coming storm. In the degji, not just food was boiling. In it, the truth was cooking that would soon make the very soul of the village tremble. In Danpur villas, news traveled faster than the wind. When women gathered at the hand pump, it was their talk that flowed more than the water. Filling her lota, Rampiari said, listen, sisters, from Sushila's house, there is the smell of meat every day. The woman beside her frowned. Yes, but Raghav, for weeks, no one has even seen him. Has he gone to the city? Or what? A third woman whispered softly. Such a deep aroma. It doesn't seem like bakra or murji. Something is off. And as soon as these words came out, fear and curiosity swam in everyone's eyes. Inside the house, the atmosphere was even heavier. At night, Deepa heard a ting-ting sound from the kitchen, as if a spoon were striking a vessel. But she knew Amma was asleep. She peeped quietly. The kitchen was dark, but a reflection of light was falling on the degji. And on the wall, there was a long shadow, as if Babuji were still sitting there. Deepa's heart began to thud. She quickly shut her eyes and held her brother tight. But her sleep broke again and again through the night. The next morning at school, the children began to taunt Deepa. Where is your Babuji? Is he in the degchi or what? Hearing this, the children's laughter rang out. Deepa's face turned pale. She ran and sat crying in a corner. For the first time, she felt that her secret would no longer remain hidden. That evening, the men gathered at the village chapel. Amid beady smoke, the talk grew heavy. Raghav used to sit here every evening. Where has he gone now? Sushila cooks meat every day, while everyone knows they don't have money. A young man said, isn't it connected to the degchi? A moment of silence fell. In everyone's ears, only the soft tap of beady embers could be heard. The Pradhan, Harinathji, was quietly listening to everything. Furrows formed on his forehead. If we call the police and all this turns out to be rumor, the village will be defamed. But if it is true and we close our eyes, the sin will be on us. At last, taking a heavy breath, he said, we must inform the Thana tomorrow itself. And indeed, the next day, two policemen came, Constable Anand and Havildar Singh. As they got off the motorcycle, children ran after them. People peeped from their houses. The atmosphere became heavy like electricity. The Pradhan said in a low voice, Sahib, the biggest reason for suspicion is her degchi. It is never empty, and there is no trace of Raghav. Anand and Singh looked at each other. There was unease in their eyes too. We will have to go to her house. But keep in mind, Anand warned the Pradhan, keep the crowd under control. If there is a commotion, the situation will worsen. Night was falling. Sushila's house was bathed in the glow of an earthen diya. The same heavy fragrance was coming from the kitchen, but this time, two silhouettes stood outside in the courtyard, Anand and Singh. See, smoke is still rising. Said Havildar Singh. Yes. Anand replied softly, tomorrow morning we will knock at the door. And then either the rumor will break or the truth will be revealed in Indian villages. Secrets do not last many days. The fragrance that once stirs hunger can also stir suspicion. Children's laughter, the neighbor's whisper, and the silence of the chapel all pointed in the same direction. Now all eyes were fixed on Sushila's Degji, and the morning's knock would pull that secret out before the world. The sun had not fully risen. A light mist still lay spread in the village lanes. But the people of Danpur could not focus on their work today. Everyone's gaze kept turning again and again to the same house, Sushila's house. Pradhan Harinath Ji. Constable Anand and Havildar Singh moved slowly towards it. Behind them trailed a bunch of children and the curious looks of the women. There was restlessness in the air. Anand knocked on the door. Thak, thak, thak. Sushila Devi. This is the police. Please open the door. For a few moments, there was silence from inside. Then came the sound of slippers scraping on the wooden floor. The door opened slowly. Standing before them was Sushila, face pale. Deep circles under her eyes, a forced smile on her lips. Her fingers were gripping the edge of the door tightly. Gee, what is the matter, she managed to say. In a calm but firm voice, Anand said, where is your husband? Raghav. No one in the village has seen him for many days. Sushila lowered her eyes, then quickly said, he has gone to the city for work. He will return. Singh observed closely. Her voice was trembling. Sweat was shining on her forehead. At that very time, a luk-luk sound came from the kitchen. The dekhi was boiling. Steam was spreading into the room, and along with it, the smell of masalas haldi, dhania, lasoon, adrak. Anand looked towards the kitchen. May we come inside, he asked. For a moment, Sushila froze. Fear flashed in her eyes. But then, lowering her head, she said, Gee. The moment they entered the room, the same fragrance and the sound of boiling enclosed the policeman. Anand slowly reached the dekchi. The lid was half open. The steam rose straight onto his face. He moved it slightly with his hand. And then, in the thick broth, pieces were floating. Their shapes were not normal. One piece looked as if a nail were stuck to it. In the middle of another piece, a white bone was showing, shaped like the wrist of a human hand. Singh stepped back at once. Drawing a deep breath, his eyes widened. What meat is this? Sushila Ji Anand asked in a heavy voice. From the doorframe, Deepa and Bittu were peeping. There was innocence in Bittu's eyes, but Deepa's lips were trembling. She gripped her younger brother's hand tightly, as if she wanted to save him from some terrible truth. The villagers standing outside were now whispering in agitation. Open the dekchi. Tell us what is inside. The noise of the crowd was slowly rising. Sushila stood there. Her face was wet with sweat, but her eyes were empty. She took a deep breath and somehow said, this is just food to feed the children. Her voice was broken. Anand and Singh looked at each other. They knew the dekchi was no longer just a vessel. It had become a witness. The village's curiosity was now colliding with the eyes of the police. The steam rising from the dekchi was no longer just a fragrance. It was evidence. Evidence that was asking questions and demanding answers. On this morning in Danpur, for the first time, the truth had knocked, and every moment after this was going to bring such a storm that the entire village would shudder. The dekchi boiling in the kitchen was no longer just a vessel in the eyes of the police. It was a doorway to the truth. Constable Anand put on gloves and slowly lifted the lid. A dense cloud of steam dissolved into the air. Amid the aroma of haldi, lasoon and masalas, a strange smell rose, the smell of blood and burnt flesh. Havildar Singh squinted and peered into the dekchi. His face turned pale. Hey Bhagwan. His voice trembled. Inside, pieces were floating in the thick broth. On one of the pieces, tiny hairs were still stuck. Another piece had a shape as if it were a human finger, the nail clearly visible. Singh suddenly stepped back, covering his mouth with his hand. Fear was evident in his eyes. As if for the first time in his life, he had seen something like this. Anand took a deep breath and, with trembling hands, extended the tongs to lift a piece out. When the broth-soaked piece was placed on a plate, its truth ended any doubt. It was the bone of a human hand. The smaller and larger bones could be clearly identified. The villagers standing at the doorway were watching this scene. First, a woman's scream rang out, "This is a human bone." Then it was as if the whole village burst. This woman is demonic. She has cooked her own husband. God save us. Women stepped back with their hands over their mouths. Children clutched their mother's palace. Some men lunged towards the door, as if the crowd would deliver its verdict right then. Pradhan Harinath Ji raised his hand and stopped them. "Stop. Let the law do its work. The anger of the crowd will destroy everyone." But the noise refused to subside. Someone picked up a stone. Someone, a lathi. Both hatred and fear drifted in the air. Sushila stood there. Her face was completely white, wet with sweat. Her lips were muttering, "This is just food for the children." But there was no conviction in her eyes, only emptiness and fear. From the corner, Deepa was watching everything. She had gripped Bitu's hand tightly. Tears were flowing from her eyes, but she made no sound, as if the truth had got stuck in her throat. Amid the crowd's chaos, suddenly, an old woman cried out loudly, "Last night I saw a dream. Raghav's spirit was weeping. He is inside this very house." For a moment, the crowd fell silent. Some people actually bowed their heads, as if they could feel the presence of a spirit. Hearing this, Sushila's body trembled, her eyes fixed on the degchi. It seemed as if a face was peeping from the boiling broth. Raghav's face, with the same contemptuous smile in his eyes. She snapped her eyelids shut, but the voice echoed in her ears, "Even if you eat me, Sushila, you will not be able to be rid of me." That day, the village of Danpur shook with terror and disbelief. The Deji was no longer just a vessel. It had become a testimony to a crime against humanity. And in the village air, there was now not only the fragrance of masalas, it had mixed with screams, whispers, and the shadows of a spirit. Only one question remained. Would the police be able to seize the truth in time? Or would the rage of the crowd swallow everything in Danpur's narrow lanes? The morning scene looked like a festival procession, but there was neither color nor music in it. There was only silence, whispers, and the smell of death. The police, treating the degki as evidence, covered it with a thick cloth and placed it in a bamboo basket. But from that cloth, at intervals, red broth was dripping, leaving small spots on the road. With every spot, the noise of the crowd rose, as if they had seen fresh blood. Constable Anand ordered in a trembling voice, "Hold it carefully. Not a drop should fall." Havildar Singh and a young constable lifted the degchi. Both their hands were shaking. Their faces were pale, as if the weight of this vessel was not only iron, but sin as well. Sushila too was brought out of the house. A rope was tied to her wrist. The crowd's eyes were on her in some disgust, in some anger, in some fear. Women pointed fingers at her, saying, "She has eaten her own husband. This woman has defiled the entire village." Some women sat on the ground and began to bang their heads as if wailing over a death. Children clutched their mother's palace. A strange funereal atmosphere spread into the air as if this were a funeral procession. But the corpse was not of a person, it was of humanity. As the procession moved towards the Thana, the whole village fell in behind. Some were calling it the procession of evidence, some the farewell of sin. More than 100 people joined the procession. No one wanted to be left behind. With every step on the road, the drops dripping from the cloth-covered degi were drawing a line on the ground, a line of blood leading straight to the Thana. Suddenly, in the crowd, an old woman scattered a fistful of ash on the road and cried out, "Raghav's spirit is going by this path. Be careful. Otherwise, his curse will fall on everyone." For a moment, the crowd halted. Many actually folded their hands. Some began to whisper mantras. Hearing this, Sushila's face turned white, her eyes fixed on the degchi, and she felt as if within the steam, Raghav's face was flickering, glowering, with red eyes. The same contemptuous smile on his lips. The crowd began to lose control. "Finish her here itself. Set this woman on fire." Some young men moved forward and began to break the police line. Constable Anand shouted in a voice shaking with anger and fear, "Back off. If you tamper with the evidence, we will have to open fire." But fear too was clearly visible in his eyes. Sweat was running down his neck. Pradhan Harinath Ji stood before the crowd with his hands raised. "Stop. Let the law do its work. The anger of the mob is not justice. It will ruin everyone." The procession kept moving slowly towards the Thana. Amid women's lamentations, Children's crying and the crowd shouts. Every drop dripping from the Degchi now seemed like a curse upon the village. Deepa and Bitu stood in the crowd. Deepa gently held her brother's hand and whispered, Bitu, whatever happens, don't let us be alone. Bitu wiped his tears and gripped her arm tightly. That procession of Danpur had now become history. The dekhi in which masalas and meat had boiled had now become, for the whole village, a symbol of death and disgrace. Every red spot that fell on that path bore witness. This story would now go out from the village threshold to the doorstep of the court. But the question remained the same. Would the law be able to reach the truth? Or would the rage of the crowd swallow everything on the way? By the time the police jeep from Danpur reached the district forensic laboratory, the night's darkness had deepened even more. Inside the jeep, the dekhi kept in a bamboo basket was still giving off faint steam. From inside, at intervals, there came a luk-luk sound, as if some invisible heartbeat were still alive in it. Constable Anand looked out of the window, but his palms were clenched. Singh, do you also feel this vessel is breathing? Singh did not reply, but the restlessness in his eyes said everything. At the laboratory, they were received by Dr. Meera Saxena, a forensic expert with a cool gaze, whose face reflected years of experience. She put on gloves and slowly lifted the lid. As the steam escaped, the whole room filled with a strange smell. It was not just the fragrance of masalas. It was a sickly sweet stench that comes from human flesh burning and cooking. All the technicians quickly pulled masks over their noses. With tongs, Dr. Meera took out the first piece. As it fell onto the steel tray, it rolled, and everyone's breath halted. It was a finger, human, the nail clearly visible. After boiling, some skin was still stuck to it. Constable Singh turned his face to stifle a retch. Hey Bhagwan, he muttered. Dr. Meera's face was stern. She took out a second piece. It was part of the ribs. There were deep cut marks on the bone, as if the same spot had been struck again and again. This is not the work of a kitchen knife. This has been done with continuous and tremendous pressure, as if someone deliberately inflicted torture. She took out a third piece, and everyone's soul seemed to shiver. That piece was half cooked, on which a mixture of haldi and mirchi was stuck, half burned. In a low voice, Dr. Meera said, someone did not want to cook this fully. It has been left half cooked, as if part of a ritual. She pointed towards the tray, and look here, small scratches on the bone. These are not natural. Marks have been made with a sharp object, as if someone has engraved mantras or symbols. Silence settled in the room. In a trembling voice, Constable Anand said, meaning, this was not just murder. Dr. Meera looked at him. Yes, not a straightforward killing. A ritual element is clearly visible, cutting the body into pieces and cooking, leaving it half-cooked, and engraving marks on the bones. This is not the work of an ordinary criminal. Those pieces of meat on the steel tray were no longer just evidence. They had become the testimony of a horrific ritual. The dead key that had come from Danpur now stood before both the police and science. And within it, every bone, every fiber, every layer of masala was saying that this case was not just the killing of a husband. It was an offering to a dark rite. Outside the village, rumors had already spread. Human flesh has been found in the Degchi, and magical marks on it as well. The villagers now believed even more that Sushila was not merely a murderess, but a practitioner of some dark ritual. In the interrogation room of the Danpur Thana, the atmosphere was so heavy, it was difficult to breathe. A bulb hung from the ceiling, its light flickering faintly now and then. On the table in front lay the forensic report, and every line of that report seemed to echo back from the walls. Sushila was made to sit on a chair. A thick layer of fatigue lay on her face. Her eyes were swollen, lips dry, and her hands, trembling again and again, were clasped tightly in her lap. Constable Anand took a deep breath and said, Sushila, there is no use in lies now. The report clearly states there was human flesh in the Degchi, and ritual marks were found on that flesh. Tell us the truth. Sushila remained silent. Her lips quivered, but words did not come out. Havildar Singh suddenly, in irritation, slapped his palm on the table. Speak. This was part of which rite? Why was the meat left half-cooked? Why were marks engraved on the bones? Silence spread through the room. Only the groan of the fan could be heard. Then, slowly, a broken voice came from Sushila's throat. That was all Ramnath's insistence. Anand leaned forward in surprise, meaning, Your husband Sushila's eyes filled. Tears rolled down her cheeks and fell. Yes, him. He had gone to a tantric. He used to say, if we offer a bali, the Devi will save us from poverty and evil. At first I got frightened. I refused. But slowly his madness grew. Every day he would drink and force me. He would say, one day you too will take part in it. Singh clenched his teeth in anger. So you made your husband the sacrifice. Sushila lowered her head. Her breathing grew heavy. That night, he was again threatening me with a knife. In front of the children, I could not bear it. I took that same knife and plunged it into his chest. Her eyes were now empty, as if nothing remained inside. But when his body fell to the ground, just then, I remembered the tantric's words, cut the body into pieces, apply masala, leave it half-cooked. Only then will the Devi's anger calm down. And then, it felt as if my hands were no longer mine. Someone else was moving me. He just kept doing it. Hearing this, the bulb in the room flickered sharply. For a moment, wavering shadows rose on the walls. Sushila turned her head with a start. Her eyes widened with fear. You cannot hear it, right? His laughter, his voice. She began pointing wildly towards the walls. Ramnath is still here. He is saying, you made me the sacrifice. Now, the whole world will know. A shiver ran through Anand's body. In a trembling voice, he said, hey, Bhagwan, perhaps this woman has truly gone mad. But Singh's face had turned pale. His lips were dry, or else she is truly hearing his voice. A few moments later, Sushila suddenly began to laugh. A strange, broken laugh. Her tears were still flowing, but a frightening smile had come to her lips. Yes, he was not just a husband. He was the Bali. That night, the words that echoed within the four walls of Danpur Thana changed the face of the entire case. It was no longer a matter of domestic violence. It was no longer only the tale of a woman's compulsion. It was no longer just murder. It had become the testimony of a blood ritual, and as soon as this news reached the village, people were no longer trembling. Only at Sushila, they were trembling at the possibility that some tantric practice might still be alive among them. As soon as the news spread in Danpur village that Sushila herself had confessed Ramnath was the sacrifice, this was all part of a ritual. It was as if poison ran through the veins of the village. By morning, a crowd had swelled at the chapel. Women were clutching their children to their chests. Elders were whispering, and there was a strange glint in the eyes of the young men. I had said it. No shadows come out of that house at night. The smell rising from the degchi, it was human, not any sag. Then what are we waiting for? That house has to be set on fire. Only then will the village be purified. A rumble rose from the crowd. Burn it. Burn it. By noon, the situation had gone out of control. Hundreds had gathered outside Sushila's house. In their hands were torches, sticks, and some iron tools. Someone was sprinkling kerosene. Someone was throwing stones at the door. Inside the house, Deep was peeping from the window. Tears were streaming from her eyes, and her lips were trembling. Ma, will these people really burn us? Sushila gathered both children in her arms. Her voice was heavy and filled with a strange conviction. Do not be afraid. The Devi's power is with us. No fire can touch us. Bitu nodded at his mother's words in innocence. But Deep's heart beat even faster. Had Ma truly sunk completely into that darkness of Devi and sacrifice outside? The crowd had gone mad. Pour the oil. Bring the house down if we don't burn it today. Raghav's spirit will devour us all. Someone hurled a stone hard at the window. The glass shattered and scattered. The children inside screamed. Just then, the police jeep entered the lane. Bripka Anand and Havildar Singh stood before the crowd. No one will light a fire. Anand's voice rang out. He raised the rifle into the air. This is a matter of law. Whoever burns the house will be put in jail. But the crowd was shouting with hands over their ears, fire, fire, fire. An old man said in a trembling voice, the policemen don't understand. Only fire will calm the spirit. This is the only way to save the village. As the eyes of the crowd and the police clashed, suddenly black smoke began to rise from inside the house, billowing from the window. It spread into the air. The crowd screamed, "Look, the spirit is coming out." Some women fainted and fell to the ground. Children began to cry and cry. Men banged their heads on the earth, as if bowing before some unseen force. Havildar Singh's face turned pale. He whispered softly, If it really was a spirit, Words stuck in Anand's throat. His fingers were set on the trigger, but inside his heart, a cold wave of fear ran. And just then, a gust of wind overturned the torches. Flames suddenly flared all around. There was a stampede in the crowd, but many took it as the wrath of Raghav's spirit. Cries and mantra chanting together became a terrifying din. On that evening in Danpur, it became clear. This fight was no longer only of people and law. It had become a battle between belief and fear. And when belief becomes blind, it turns into a fire more frightening than any torch. Night's darkness had completely settled over Danpur. In the air, the smell of smoke and kerosene was still drifting. As if the village had burnt its own breath, the police had, with great difficulty, held the crowd back. But Anand and Singh knew if Sushila and her children were not taken out immediately, the next morning only ash would remain. At midnight, the jeep entered the lane. The silence was broken only by the beat of damru and dolak, which some villagers were playing continuously. Some women were muttering mantra-like words, as if doing a totka to bind some devil. The barking of dogs and the crying of children made the dark atmosphere even heavier. The door opened. Inside, Deep and Bitu were curled in their mother's lap. Deep's eyes were dry but fixed in emptiness. Bitu, half asleep, was shivering with fear. "Come," Anand said in a low voice. "We are taking you to a safe place." Sushila held the children's hands and stepped outside. The scene outside was nothing less than a final procession. On both sides of the village lanes, hundreds of people stood holding torches. Women, heads covered, were muttering abuses. Some men were sprinkling sindoor on the ground, as if an impure spirit were passing. Whispers rose from the crowd. "This is the one who offered the sacrifice. This Dayan is leaving the village. Tonight, Danpur will be purified." A woman flung a dry garland towards the jeep, the kind often used in funeral processions. The garland got caught on the jeep's bonnet. The crowd shouted in unison, "The ghost has gone. The village is saved." In innocence, Bitu asked his mother, "Ma, why are these people looking at us like this, as if we are not human?" Deep held her brother tight, but her lips were trembling. She looked out of the window, the beat of the damru, the torches, the chanting, and bowed silhouettes. It all felt like some tantric act. Her breath caught. Had the whole village really begun to consider them ghosts? Now the police jeep moved forward. The crowd gave way, but their eyes followed. Sushila filled with fear and hatred. Suddenly, an old man shouted in a trembling voice, "The police are deceiving us. Only fire is the real medicine." The crowd flared up again. Some torches were waved high. The smell of oil spread into the air. Anand lifted the rifle and fired into the air. No one will move forward. The crowd retreated. But whispers and abuses continued to echo. The jeep slowly drove out of the village, leaving behind rows of torches, the thump of the dolak, and a clamor of screams. That night in Danpur, the scene was not the verdict of a court. It was the verdict of the crowd. The police did save Sushila and her children, but the village had already declared them dead. History is witness in many parts of India. Women have been branded Dayan and driven out of villages. This night in Danpur became a new chapter of that dark tradition. And when society turns someone from human into ghost, the path of justice becomes longer and more frightening. Night had grown deep. In a thana of a kasbah far from Danpur, Sushila sat behind iron bars. The walls were damp with moisture. The bulb hanging above was flickering. Inside the cell, there was silence. But that silence was no less frightening than a scream. Slowly, sounds began to reach her ears, drops falling from an iron rod. Tap, tap, the scurry of rats, the faint clink of a rusted lock. Each sound, joining her heartbeat, was making a restless rhythm. Deep and Bitu had been put to sleep in the adjacent room. Deep was awake, her eyes shining in the dark. Bitu turned restlessly, and even in sleep whispered from his lips, "Ma, Ma." There was no sign of sleep on Sushila's eyelids. Then, suddenly, Sushila. She started. She looked all around. No one was there. Only the flicker of the bulb was casting long shadows on the wall. "You thought that by boiling me, cutting me, turning me to ash, you would finish me. I am right here." The voice was Ramnath's, heavy, rough, and cold. Her chest began to heave fast. She covered both her ears. "No, you are dead. I finished you." But the voice came closer, as if standing right behind her. By your hands, in your degchi, I remained alive. As long as your children carry me within them, I will never die. Sushila grabbed the bars and began to shake them hard. Her forehead struck the wall. A thin line of blood fell. The guard came running. What are you doing, Sushila? Only kept whispering. Be quiet. Be quiet. In her eyes, terror and madness were shining together. Meanwhile, in Danpur village, under a peepal tree at the crossroads, a Havankund had been set up. The boom of dholak and nagada was tearing the sky. Women, with red pots on their heads, were moving in circles. The thump of their feet was raising dust. The pujari, pouring ghee into the fire, was shouting, "Tonight, we must drive the devil out of this village." The crowd roared, "Be gone, spirit, be gone." Diane children were being taken around the fire, as if ash were purifying them. Some people were molding clay dolls and filling them with red color. This is the symbol of Sushila and Ramnath. The pujari thundered. The dolls were thrown into the fire. The crowd began to clap. But then, the direction of the wind changed. The fire suddenly flared up. The flames rose twice as high. The plume of smoke tangled in the tree above and slowly formed a shape: broad shoulders, a long face, an ironic glint in the eyes. The crowd froze into silence. Women fell to the ground and began to weep. A man cried out, trembling, "Look, Ramnath has returned." Some people were so terrified that they began to beat themselves with ash. As if offering a sacrifice, a woman screamed hysterically, "Until the lives of his children are taken." This spirit will not leave the village. In the fana, Sushila heard the same voice. "See, I have returned. And this time, not only for you, for the entire village." Her eyes rolled back. Laughter burst from her lips, cold. Broken, leaning against the wall, she whispered, "Yes, I knew. You would never go." That night, two scenes were unfolding side by side. On one side, behind bars, a woman's madness. On the other side, the entire village, turning its fear into fire and drums. The question now had become even deeper. Was Ramnath's spirit truly still hovering? Or is it human fear itself that is the Rakshas, which makes a new face in every fire? The morning mist had not fully lifted yet. From the outside, the forensic lab building looked calm, but inside the air was taut with anxiety. The police jeep pulled up. Bripka Anand and Havildar Singh entered with heavy steps. There was no trace of sleep on either face. The previous night's torches, the crowd's screams, and Sushila's laughter were still echoing in their minds. Inside, Dr. Mehrotra stood in a white coat, dark circles on her eyes, a thick report in her hands. She said straight away, "Please sit." What we have found is not just murder. The first slide of the report came up on the screen: bone fragments, half-burnt tissue, and cuts made by a knife. In a low but cold voice, Dr. Mehrotra said, "On these pieces we found heat trauma. That is, these parts were boiled when the tissue was still alive." Anand's heart sank. Meaning? The doctor lowered her eyes. Ramnath was not fully dead. When his flesh was cut and boiling, he was still breathing. A death-like silence spread in the room. Singh gripped the chair tightly. And one more thing. The next slide showed traces of spices: haldi, mustard oil, particles of dried chili. This was not any normal cooking process. Every cut follows a pattern, as if it were a kitchen recipe. A coating of haldi on the meat, a layer of oil, in slow flame. Singh's throat went dry. "Hey Bhagwan, this truly was some ritual." Dr. Mehrotra nodded gravely. "Yes, not just a killing, but ritualistic cooking. The sequence of cuts, the use of spices, all according to a plan. And on some parts, there are signs of struggle. It is possible that at the start, Ramnath did not resist. Perhaps he joined, considering himself the sacrifice. But later, he could not bear the pain." Anand's breathing quickened. In his ears resounded the roar of the crowd, the pujari's voice, and Sushila's broken laughter. In a low tone, he said, "So when she had said it was an offering to the Devi, perhaps it was not just madness." Singh added in a trembling voice, "If this is true, then we are not fighting, only people, but something else." Dr. Mehrotra closed the file. In history, there are many places where cases of human sacrifice have surfaced: Odisha, Bengal, even up to Bihar. There too, the same pattern: living sacrifice to please the Devi. Danpur's case seems part of that dark chain. The forensic report made Danpur's story even more frightening. Now, this was not merely murder. It was a living sacrifice under the cover of kitchen and ritual. The smoke rising from Ramnath's body had filled not only Sushila's degchi, but had defiled the village's very soul. And the real question now grew deeper. Was this crime only Sushila's, or was the society also guilty? Which, by believing the ritual to be true, stood by in her silence. It was night. On the walls of the Thana's interrogation room, a yellow tube light was flickering. There were only 3 people in the room: Sushila, Bripkanan, and Havildar Singh. The thick file on the table had just been opened, and its very first line was frightening. Ramnath was alive when his body was boiling. Anand took a deep breath and slid the file forward. Sushila. His voice carried both sternness and fatigue. The report says that Ramnath was still breathing when pieces of his body were put into the degchi. You tell us, how did this happen? In the yellow light, Sushila's face looked even more terrifying. Her lips were cracked, her eyes swollen, but in them, there was a strange glint. She was silent for a few moments. Then her lips quivered. First slowly, then suddenly a thin laugh escaped, harsh. Broken, yes, he was alive. Her voice trembled. But the words were clear, because a sacrifice is complete only when the breath is still moving. Singh's forehead was wet with sweat. He muttered, "Sacrifice? Whose sacrifice?" Sushila slowly lifted her head, her eyes fixed on some invisible image of the Devi. It was a pact. Ramnath and I sat together and promised the Devi. In return, we were to receive happiness, strength, and the children's protection. He himself agreed. Anand clenched his fist. "You are saying that Ramnath consented to his own death?" Sushila suddenly laughed, and in the very next moment, tears flowed from her eyes. She began to speak in a disjointed way. "In the beginning, yes. We both did the puja. We sprinkled haldi, offered mustard oil. And then the Devi's voice came. From the body, the sacrifice. From the kitchen, the prasad." She stopped suddenly. Her lips quivered. In a whisper, she said, "But when the knife struck his bones, when the steam was cutting through his skin, then he screamed. Very loudly, but it was too late." His screams themselves became the Devi's mantras. Singh's face turned pale. He grabbed the chair so that he would not fall. This is madness. "You have committed murder, Sushila." "Only murder." Sushila jerked forward. Her eyes widened. Now her voice was a frightening whisper. "No, this is not a crime. This was a yajna. My kitchen was the temple. And Degji, that was the Devi's Havankund." She suddenly began to weep. Then in between bursts of laughter, at times her face was wet with remorse. At times it shone with madness. "I gave from my body. I gave from his body. Now the Devi will never let the children go hungry. This is our pact. This is the pact." Anand looked towards Singh. In his eyes, there was both fear and anger. He spoke slowly. "So you accept that this was not murder?" But a ritual Sushila wiped her tears, then brought a broken smile to her lips and said, "Yes. And as long as my children are alive, the pact is alive." What emerged in the interrogation room that night cast an even darker shadow over the case. It was no longer merely a file of murder. It was a pact made with a Devi where death was offered like prasad, and the kitchen was made into a Havankund. But the real question remained. Was Sushila truly mad? Or had some invisible power indeed made Ramnath its sacrifice? And the most frightening thought, if the pact is still alive, then who will be its next offering? The morning sun had descended over Danpur village. But the air was heavy, as if the sky itself had swallowed the village's fear. The news that had come out of the police outpost through the night had spread like fire and scorched every household. Everyone had come to know that in interrogation, Sushila had confessed Ramnath's sacrifice had been offered to the Devi. And the Degji itself was the Havan Kund. People stood in groups at the village Chopal. Whispers had now turned into open shouts. That woman is a witch. She has made a pact with the Devi and her children. They are no longer human. They are the offspring of a demon. A woman said, weeping, "Last night, I saw that same house in my dream. Smoke was coming out of the window, and I could hear the laughter of a dead man." A man shouted, "Yes. I too heard sounds from that house at night, as if someone's bones were cracking." Fear took the shape of truth, and truth now became the weapon of the crowd. By evening, people gathered outside the temple with torches. In place of bells, The thunder of mantras was echoing. The pujari, with vibhuti on his forehead, said, "The Devi will be calmed only when the impurity is burnt away. Both the house and the lineage must be purified." The crowd roared, "Burn the house. Drive out the witch. Bring the children out. They are impure too." Sushila's house was surrounded from all sides. The light of torches cast frightening shadows on the windows. Someone hurled a clay pot at the door. Someone threw ash and shouted, "This ash will finish the witch's power." In the crowd, an old man said, trembling, "But the children are innocent. Why should they?" His voice drowned in the screams of the crowd. Someone shoved him and silenced him. "Those born of a witch are the same as her." Inside, Deepa clutched her mother's Odani and trembled. Arjun's face was wet with tears. Both heard every blow landing on the door, felt every mantra. Sushila sat on the floor, eyes wide. Her lips were whispering, "See, the Devi has summoned them. Now only through fire will there be purification." On her face were both tears and laughter, a madness that frightened the children even more. Outside, a torch was pressed to the wall. In the dry thatch wall, flames flashed like sparks. The crowd clapped and shouted, "Jai Devi Ma, turn the witch to ash." That night, Danpur village was not a court of law. It was a dance of the mob. Fear took the form of belief. Belief became violence, and violence declared even the children guilty. Sushila was now a witch, her children, demons, and the house, a stage for sacrifice. But the question remained, was this truly the power of the Devi? Or the darkest face of human beings? Night had grown deep. Danpur's lanes burned with the light of torches and the echo of mantras. The crowd had surrounded Sushila's house from all sides. Small tongues of flame danced on the walls. And with every scream, the Devi's name was being taken. "Burn the house, bring the witch out, purify the children." The atmosphere was so heavy it felt as if even the air was filled with fire and ash. Just then, suddenly, the sound of sirens rang out. Red-blue lights sliced through the darkness. Police vehicles entered the village. Ripka Anand and Havildar Singh moved towards the crowd with dozens of policemen. "Move back," Anand roared over the mic. "This mob rule will not work. This is a matter of law." But the crowd screamed even louder, "We don't want a witch. If the police protect her, the police too will become impure." Some threw stones. Some hurled abuses at the policemen. The police swung their leaders. The crowd fell back a little, but the anger was still boiling. Anand and Singh ran straight towards the house. From inside came the children's screams mixed with Sushila's broken laughter. When they broke the door and entered, the sight was blood-freezing. Deepa and Arjun were huddled in the corners, and Sushila was sitting on the floor, eyes raised to the sky, muttering, "Look, the Devi has sent the fire. The pact is being fulfilled." Anand shouted, "Sushila, get up. You and the children have to be taken out at once." Sushila began to laugh. "No, the Devi has said purification will be only through fire." Singh, in anger, grabbed her and made her stand. The children were taken into their arms. At that very moment, there were heavy thuds on the door from outside. The crowd was about to force its way in. Somehow the police brought the three out. The crowd's uproar grew more violent. Torches waved in the air. The mantras boomed louder. "See, the witch is being taken out. Bring the children out too. These are demons' offspring." The policemen formed a cordon all around. Anand kept the children in the middle. Sushila was being led away bound. And the entire village crowd fell in behind this convoy, as if it was some terrifying procession, amid torchlight and the thunder of mantras. This procession passed through the village lanes. Women sprinkled water from their doorways, as if washing away impurity. Children were crying. The old bowed their heads, scattering ash on the ground. In one voice, the crowd was shouting, "Drive the witch out of the village. Do not spare the demon's offspring." That night, in Danpur's lanes, the face of humanity was erased. This was no longer police protection. It was a demonic Shobhayatra, where a mother and her children were taken out as if they were not human, but an ill omen. Watching them, the crowd had already decided they were ghosts and spirits. And the police, even if they wished, could not extinguish this dark belief. Sushila and her children were now being taken out of the village. But the question remained, were they truly being taken out of the village? Or had the entire village itself slowly sunk into the darkness? After that terrifying night in Danpur, Sushila and her two children were brought out of the village. The police kept them in temporary custody at the Kasbah, behind bars, where the light was weak and the air heavy with damp. Sushila still sat on the floor. Her eyes looked hollow. Her lips were dry, but kept moving. "You think the pact is broken," she muttered, staring at the wall. And then, the same voice, deep, heavy, trembling, echoed in her ears. "No. Sushila, I am right here. As long as the children are breathing, the pact stands." She covered her ears with both hands and shut her eyes. But the voice came closer. "You put me in the fire. You boiled me. And now, I am in every breath, in every morsel, in your children's bodies." Sushila sprang up in alarm and struck the bars with her hands. "Quiet. Be quiet." But the god thought the woman had simply gone mad. That same night, in Danpur village, the atmosphere grew even more terrifying. Hundreds gathered in the temple courtyard. The Pandit said that now there was only one remedy, a Mahayagya and a Bhut-Pret Nivaran ritual. Torches were lit. Drums began to beat. Women draped red chunaris over their heads. And men smeared ash and chanted mantras. The witch's shadow is over the village. Until she and her children are separated from the Devi, the village will remain under threat. Villagers formed a ring around a large vedi. Coconuts, lemons, and goats were offered in sacrifice. The sound of the mantras was so deep, it felt as if the ground itself was shaking. Sitting in custody at the Kasbah, Sushila suddenly began to tremble. Her eyes rolled back. "Are you hearing it?" "Sushila," the voice whispered. "They are all trying to drive me away together, but I am inside you. Until the pact is fulfilled, no yagya can remove me." Her breathing grew fast, deeper and urgent. Who were in a separate room suddenly woke up. They said someone was slowly calling their mother's name. That night, two scenes were unfolding at once. In the village, the crowd, with torches lit, chanting the names of the goddesses, as if exorcising the entire village. And in the Kasbah's custody, Sushila alone, but Ramnath's voice still in her ears, as if he were not imprisoned outside the bars, but present within her. The village believed they were burning away the shadow of the witch and the demon, but the real question was, this can fire and mantras truly break a pact? Or had the pact now descended into the children's blood? The next morning, at the Kasbah's forensic lab, the atmosphere was unusually grave. Between white walls, Dr. Mehrotra was arranging her documents. The lack of sleep in her eyes and the hard fatigue on her face were clearly visible. Bribka Anand and Havildar Singh entered the room. Both their eyes went straight to the report on the table, in which the truth of the whole case was hidden. Without wasting time, Dr. Mehrotra began to speak. "We have completed the DNA and tissue analysis of the remains recovered from Ramnath's body. The results are not ordinary." Silence spread through the room. She slowly opened the report and laid out the photograph's burn marks on bones, deep knife cuts on muscle, and on some parts, a strange effect of boiling. "Look," the doctor indicated. "These are not ordinary cut marks. This has been done with pressure and heat. And the most frightening thing, there is a vital reaction in the tissue." Anand frowned, meaning, the doctor's voice turned colder, meaning that when Ramnath's flesh was boiled, he was not fully dead. The cells of his body were still alive. In simple words, Ramnath was put into the karahi while still alive. Singh's eyes widened. He cleared his throat, but the words stuck. Etched in those screams were real. Dr. Mehrotra nodded. "Yes, there is evidence of pain-induced convulsions on the body. He was struggling. Perhaps he had been bound. And traces of spices and haldi indicate that this was not cooking as such, but ritualistic cooking. The body parts were cut in a sequence, masala apliye, and then boiled." Anand's face turned to stone. So Sushila was not lying. The pact, the yajna, this was not merely her imagination. She truly made her husband the sacrifice. Softly, Dr. Mehrotra said, "Perhaps, but there is something more." She picked up the second sheet of the report. "In Ramnath's blood, we found traces of sedatives, which means, at the beginning, he did not resist. It is possible he participated, considering himself the sacrifice. But when the real pain began, his body started to scream. That is when the ritual took on a horrific form. Shivering, Singh gripped a chair. "Hey, Bhagwan, then is this only Sushila's crime? Or did it begin with the consent of both?" Dr. Mehrotra took a deep breath. "This is the most frightening part of the case. This is not only murder. This was a pact. And the marks found on the body prove it was done to complete the sacrifice. Now the question is offered, to whom the forensic report made Danpur's story even darker. Now this was not merely murder, it was a living sacrifice, where Aman was turned into Prasad even before he died. Ramnath's screams were no longer just memories. They had become proof that his death was not a meal, but a ritual. And the greatest mystery still lived. Was all this only Sushila's madness? Or truly a pact made with the Devi that night? Oppressive silence lay over the interrogation room of the Danpur Thana. White walls all around, thick files on the table, and the dim flicker of a yellow tube light. Sushila sat on an iron chair, hands trembling, beads of sweat on her forehead. Her eyes were sunken with fatigue, yet in them a strange glint was still alive, as if some secret from within was holding her up. Bripka Anand slapped the file down on the table. Sushila. His voice was heavy and cold. Here is the forensic report. Dr. Mehrotra has said clearly Ramnath was not fully dead. His body was alive when it was put into the boiling karahi. His tissues, his nerves, everything is evidence. Don't lie any further. Leaning forward, Havildar Singh said, "Tell us, why did you do this? And in whose name Sushila's throat was dry?" She moistened her lips, then smiled slowly, a smile in which both madness and calm were mixed. "You people think I was alone?" Her voice was like a whisper, yet it echoed in the room. "No." Ramnath himself agreed, because the two of us had made a pact. Anand frowned, a pact with whom Sushila's gaze lifted towards the ceiling, as if she were looking at an unseen power. With the Devi, the air in the room suddenly felt colder. Sushila opened her palms as if showing something. It was the night of Amavasya, under the banyan tree outside the village. A tantrik had come. He said, "If you want to be free of your suffering, if your children must remain safe, then offer a bali to the Devi." The husband would be the greatest Ahuti. Her eyes widened, though trembling, was full of reverence. Ramnath refused at first. But when I said that by his death the Devi would give us peace and strength, he agreed. He himself brought the knife. And I only completed the last act. Singh's face turned pale, meaning this was all a yajna. Sushila nodded slowly. Yes, the Devi had said cook his flesh, apply haldi and salt, and feed your children. Only then will their fear end. Only then will they become strong. Every morsel, a protective kavach. She struck the table with a hand, as if invoking an invisible force. You think this is murder, no? This was a pact, and a pact cannot be broken. Until every bone, every particle becomes prasad, the Devi will not be appeased. Anand drew a deep breath, his fists clenched with anger and dread. Sushila, this is madness. You burned your husband alive and fed his flesh to the children, and you say it was the Devi's command. Sushila laughed a laugh that struck the room's walls and returned more terrifying. You will not understand. Ramnath is still with me. His screams, his blood. The Devi has accepted it all, and when night falls, you too will hear him. This confession turned Danpur's mysterious tale even darker. It was no longer merely the killing of a husband by a wife. It had become a pact made in the Devi's name, in which a husband's living sacrifice was offered. And the most dreadful question still hung in the air. Was Sushila mad? Or was there truly some unknown power behind her, guiding her every step? On that day, an extraordinary crowd had gathered at the Danpur district court. Outside, hundreds stood, some with folded hands murmuring mantras, others hurling abuses. In everyone's eyes there was the same question. Was Sushila truly a witch, or a helpless and unhinged woman? Inside, the court's walls echoed with only one name, Sushila Devi. Bripka Anand and Havildar Singh stood to give testimony. They had the forensic report, Dr. Mehrotra's statement, and Sushila's own confession. The judge glanced over the documents, then looked straight at Sushila. Do you admit that you killed your husband, cooked his flesh, and fed it to the children? Sushila nodded calmly. Yes, but this was not murder. It was the Devi's command. It was a pact. Her voice spread through the courtroom like a cold wave. Some people laughed. Some shouted, "She is mad," and some bowed their heads. Trembling, Dr. Mehrotra deposed scientifically, it is proven that Ramnath's flesh was boiled while he was alive. The sequence of cuts and boiling shows this was not an ordinary crime, rather a ritual. The judge drew a deep breath. In the eyes of the law, this is murder and cannibalism. And the sentence, life imprisonment. The gavel struck. The verdict was delivered. But outside, the crowd did not fall silent. As soon as the decision was announced, slogans erupted. She is a witch. Purify the village. Do not spare her children. They are demons too. Under heavy security, the police brought Sushila out. Her two children, Radha and Arjun, terrified, clung to her shawl. The villagers followed behind, like a frightening bridal procession of a witch. In place of drums and nagaras, there were whispers and chants. Women waved red chunris. The pujari sprinkled ash and sindoor, as if they were sending off not a criminal, but an ill-omened spirit. On the way to the thana, suddenly a woman cried out, "Look, in the smoke!" Ramnath's face, all eyes lifted to the sky. For a moment, the smoke rising from the chulas did look like a man's face. Children began to cry, and panic spread through the crowd. Anand roared in anger, "Enough! This is all delusion. The law has given its verdict. The crowd will not write the law now." But his voice was drowned in the clamor. Danpur's case was fought not only in court, but in every heart and mind. The law called it murder. The village called it a witch's ritual. And for the children, it will always remain an unfinished tale. Even today, the villagers say in the night silence, if someone passes along Danpur's old road, the air still carries the scent of haldi and meat, and from somewhere far away, a woman's voice is heard. The pact is still incomplete.